This video will cover customizing labels in ggplot visualizations. By the end of this video, you should understand what text you can customize on a ggplot visualization and what types of labels lead to a good visualization. The code used in this video is available on Elms. You should download it now if you'd like to follow along. We're going to use data from the Iris dataset, which is built into R. Up to this point, we've learned how to make ggplot visualizations and customize the appearance of those visualizations using aesthetics to change the way data are rendered in the graph, and also using layer properties to change the way entire layers are rendered in the visualization. An additional component to customizing ggplot visualizations are visualization properties. These are going to change the appearance of the whole visualization. You can think of things like labels and titles, for example, the graph title, the axis labels, or the axis scale. The overall appearance, things like the font, the background color, or grid lines. And lastly, things like the size or dimensions of a graph, the aspect ratio, so the ratio of the height to the width, or how big the margins are. You're going to set visualization properties the same way you add layers to a visualization. So again, they'll be separated by a plus sign. There are many functions that set the visualization properties. I call those viz props here. This video is going to cover one subset of those visualization properties, which change the text that appears on your visualization. You can change text in your visualization by altering the labels. These are probably the most important visualization property you might manipulate. These include titles. So for example, the graph as a whole and a subtitle that might go along with it as well. The graph tag, or a piece of text that might label a graph. Text on the X and the Y axis to specify the information contained on that axis, or possibly the units as well. These are all designed to communicate the content of your visualization. Importantly, no visualization is complete without proper labels. But just to re-emphasize, no visualization is complete without proper labels. So why is it that we need labels in our visualization? Those labels are meant to make it easy to digest the information that's contained in a visualization. Let's look at the example visualization that I have here. This is very similar to something we might have made in the past. Again, this uses the Iris dataset, and you can see that there's a bunch of plots in this visualization. They're color-coded according to the species legend. But the actual information contained in this visualization is really tough to discern by looking at it. What does sepal.length mean? What units are they encoded in? What does species mean? And what am I supposed to take away from this visualization? So we're going to use visualization labels to communicate relevant information about the visualization to the viewer. Looking at this new example, it's a lot easier to discern what the graph is trying to tell us and what information is contained within it. The title and the subtitle tell us what we're supposed to take away from this visualization. The axis labels, in plain English, communicate the information that's encoded in each axis, including the units that are used. The legend has a detailed title, and importantly, the caption in the lower right-hand corner contains the source of the data that was used in this visualization. All of this information is essential for creating a visualization that can be understood by the viewer in just a glance. So how are we going to add this information to our visualizations? Again, you set the labels using visualization properties. So these are additional functions that you'll add onto your visualization, again, separating them with the plus sign. There are two ways to set labels in your visualizations. The first, which I'll exclusively focus on, is the labs function. It's a function that takes any number of named arguments where you specify a label name, use the equal sign, and then put the text you would like in that label in quotation marks. Possible label names include title, subtitle, caption, or tag. There are other visualization property functions that do the exact same thing. So if you search for help, you might encounter things like ggtitle, xlab, and ylab. I'm going to focus on this labs function because it's much easier to use and easier to remember what all of the label names are. So how would I have added those labels to the visualization I showed you? Again, I would add a visualization property function, which is this labs function. And I have the code of that labs function here in the upper left-hand corner. So again, I would specify labs, and then first I want to set the title. So I would say title equal to, and the text I would like in the title inside quotation marks, followed by subtitle equal to, and then the text I would like on the subtitle. Likewise, the caption is the citation in the lower right-hand corner. X and Y specify the text I would like to use to label the X and Y axes. And then lastly, you'll see that I say color is equal to species name. This is setting the title of the color legend. We'll talk more about legend titles at the end of the video. So let's go through and customize some labels in an actual ggplot visualization. The first thing I'll do in my sample code is run all of the setup code that I need. Now let's take a look at some sample visualization code. So what I have here is something very similar to visualization code we've seen in the past. I'm going to create a point geometry from the iris dataset, putting sepal length on the x-axis and sepal width on the y-axis. You'll notice afterwards, I have the visualization properties labs function, and I set a number of pieces of text that I would like to appear in the visualization. So I've used very general terms here, so we can take a look at how they're actually rendered in the visualization. So let's run this code and see what we get. So looking at the visualization in the lower right-hand corner, you see there's a piece of text at the top in bold that says title. That corresponds to the title component. Below it is the subtitle. In the far lower right-hand corner is the caption. The tag is in the upper left-hand corner. You would generally use this to put a number or a reference in your graph. And then finally, the x-axis title and y-axis titles are set as well. So again, each of these arguments to the labs function produces or changes a specific piece of text in your output visualization. You can also use the labs function to set the title on legends. So remember, R automatically creates a legend whenever you set something like the color or the size aesthetics. You can set the title using a label name that is the exact same as the aesthetic name that created that legend. So for example, if a legend was created by setting the color aesthetic, you can set the title of that legend in the labs function by saying color equal to, and then the title you would like on that legend in quotation marks. So let's see how you set these legend titles in RStudio. So first, as an example, I'm going to create a visualization that sets two aesthetics that would generate legends, the color and the size aesthetics. I'm going to save that result in a visualization called viz.noLabels. If you remember, what will happen is when I run this code, R will do everything that it needs to do to create the visualization, but it won't print it out. So let's run that bit of code. You can see in the Environment Explorer, a new variable has appeared, viz.no.labels, but no visualization is printed out. If we'd like to take a look at this visualization, again, you can use the print function to display it. So I'm going to do that here. Now you can see a visualization has appeared in the viewer window, and you can see there are two legends on the right-hand side, and they have titles that just defaulted to the names of the variables that created them. So petal.width and species. These are less than ideal titles, and in a good visualization, we'd change both of these. So how are we going to do that? So again, remember, you can set the title of each legend using an argument to the labs function that matches the name of the aesthetic that created that legend. So let's take a look at some more code that I have. So in the first bit of code, I take that viz.no.labels visualization I've already created, and I add an additional visualization property to it that sets the name of the title and the color legend. I'm not saving this to a variable, so it'll print out right away. Let's run that bit of code and see what we get. So you can see in the lower right-hand corner, that visualization now has a title that I specified in the labs function. And you'll notice the species legend now has a title species name. So this is one of the legend titles. We'd actually like to set both of them. So in the second bit of code here, I take that same basic visualization, viz.no.labels. I add the visualization properties labels function, and I set both the color and the size legend titles. Let's run that bit of code. Looking in the viewer window, you can now see that both legends have a title, the first one being petal width in centimeters, and the second being species name. So again, this labs function provides a convenient way to set the titles of the legends that are automatically generated by R. This visualization is not complete though. It's important to label the axes and tell anyone who's looking at the visualization what units are being used. Also, you might want to add descriptive titles and subtitles. So in the last bit of code I have in this example, I actually create visualizations that you saw earlier in the video. So I'm going to start by creating a basic visualization. It has no labels. That's the no labeled visualization that I showed you in the slide deck. I'm going to save that to a variable because I'd like to add on to it later. I'll run that bit of code. Again, no visualization prints out because I saved it to a variable. The next thing that I'd like to do is add labels to that visualization. So the next bit of code that I have takes that base visualization, adds the labs function, and then sets the text for everything that I'd like to be labeled. I save that to a variable called viz. I'll run that code. Again, no visualization is created because I saved it to a variable, but they're stored in memory. If I'd like to take a look at that finished visualization, I can use the print function. I'll just type that in, running it, and then you can see that I have a finished visualization in the viewer window. The last bit of code that I have in this example simply takes those visualizations and saves them to output files. So again, by setting the labs visualization property, You can customize the text that appears in your visualization to make it easy for anyone looking at the visualization to understand exactly what information it's communicating.